this section and the subsequent sections, we're going to be looking at virtual domains, virtual hosting. Let's log in, and we'll take a look at the current virtual domain configuration. Now, by default, Postfix, like other MTAs, is set up to handle a few domains. We'll explain what those domains are. Let's open a shell, and we'll navigate in as the user root. We'll then navigate into etc postfix, since it's our home directory for our configuration files. So as I've mentioned, Postfix is configured to handle multiple domains, so you can consider it out of the box or fresh from a compilation already set up to serve virtual domains or multiple domains. Since the idea of virtual domains is to be able to map multiple domains to your system regardless of the host name of the system. Always keep in mind that using hostname -f will dump the fully qualified domain name of your local system. This is also considered the canonical name, one of the canonical names of the system. By default, almost any MTA, and especially or including Postfix, will accept messages destined to user at canonical domain. In this case, linuxcbt suzyserv1.linuxcbt.internal. This is considered local. And as we've mentioned, there are other names that are considered local, such as user at localhost, and optionally user at domain, such as linuxcbt.internal, if specified in the main.cf file. Now, the key directive that distinguishes the canonical domains is called MyDestination. So simply execute a postconf, which will examine the key value pairs in your main.cf configuration file, grep the MyDestination parameter, and you'll see that it's set to my host name, which expands to the fully qualified domain name of the host, localhost, and my domain. So by default, we're accepting messages to at least, apparently, 3 different domains. One you can consider to be a subdomain because it includes the host part. The other is simply localhost in the event that a user appends localhost to the end of the or in the domain section, and the other is my domain. So we have 3 at least. There's still one other that we've yet to look at, which isn't terribly important since it isn't used quite frequently. Simply execute an ifconfig, and it will return the IP address of the system. Our enterprise box has an IP address of .30. Let's now launch our mail user agent mutt, compose a new message, and send it to root at, in between brackets, the IP address that we just copied into memory. This will send a message to the IP address directly, which the Postfix MTA will handle and route into the proper user's mailbox. So the user at IP address is also considered a domain, which is to be routed using the local transport. We'll say testing IP domain, no message, no body required, and we'll send the message, and it's now in our inbox. There it is, new message. This message was actually sent to the user at the IP address. It didn't bounce. So that's yet another domain which is considered part of the canonical domains that by default Postfix will handle messages for. However, if you'd like to add additional domains to the canonical list of domains as well as hosted domains, simply modify your main.cf file, find the MyDestination directive, and add or append to this list the additional domains that you'd like to support. Now you may be wondering, is this an ideal way to support virtual domains? It depends on what your configuration requires. For most corporate setups where multiple domains are used for routing messages as well as other items, simply appending the multiple names to the MyDestination directive is sufficient. So you may have a corporation, XYZ Corporation, which also goes by the name of XYZ1, XYZ2, and so on. I'll give you a real-world example. The linuxcbt.com domain is also known as linuxcomputerbasedtraining.com, linuxcbt.net, US.org, and so on. Those are all additional domains which can be appended to the MyDestination variable, and in essence, configures virtual domains, because every user who has a local Unix account on the system will be able to receive messages at the various domains that are appended to MyDestination. So we're handling these 3 domains, and if we'd like to handle or consider other domains to be local, simply append them to this list. Now let's add linuxcbt.external as our newly hosted virtual domain. Again, our system isn't known as this domain, so it's called a hosted domain. It's not a part of the canonical list. linuxcbt.external. Now, we did configure earlier on the relay domains, so let's look for relay domains, or in that area, to ensure that we're not relaying messages that match these given domains out to a different host. Here we have relay_domains configured to route messages based on a hash, which is based on a lookup. We can simply alter this so that our system doesn't relay it or attempt to relay it based on MX. What happens is, if relay_domains, a directive, references additional domains via the hash, it'll attempt to, unless it matches my destination, which in our case it does because we've just appended to the variable, it'll attempt, in normal cases, if you don't append the domain to my destination, to route the message using either the transport table, if there is a mapping that matches, which is defined, or using MX, which is based on DNS. So we'll simply create a new variable, or a new version of the relay domains variable, and we'll set it equal to what it was originally, my destination. So now our configuration is proper. We've altered my destination as well as relay_domains. Let's save the changes. We'll then execute postfix, reload, and now we're set to handle this additional domain, linuxcbt.external. And a postconf grep of my destination will show or reflect that we're handling this new domain. So now messages destined to our host or destined to user at linuxcbt.external will be handled by our system. But in order for the messages to actually get here, we need to ensure that the DNS infrastructure is set up properly. So a simple dig linuxcbt.external space MX for the mail exchanger record will reveal which host is currently servicing the domain. And the host that's servicing the domain is linuxcbt work1. So locally, if we were to send a message to a user at linuxcbt.external, postfix will by default route it locally because it's included, the domain that is included in the my destination parameter. But if the host linuxcbt work1 attempts to send a message, it'll think that it's the final destination for the linuxcbt.external. So we need to clean up DNS and clean up the remote system's postfix configuration so that it routes the messages properly. In a separate window, let's SSH in as root to linuxcbt work1.linuxcbt.internal. We'll authenticate, of course, and then we'll navigate into etc postfix, at which point we'll modify the main.cf. Now if we execute postconf on a remote system and grep my destination, we'll see what's configured. And my destination on the remote system is currently set to nothing because when we left off, we were configuring the null client. So having said that, it's not set up to relay any of the domains, or relay locally any of the domains. It'll simply rely upon MX and mail transports for relaying. Which also brings up another point. You can check to see if there's a transport defined, but this is the default file. So we look pretty good. So the only thing that needs to be changed is actually DNS. So let's launch YaST to update the DNS configuration to make linuxcbt SUSYServe1 the MX or mail exchanger for the linuxcbt.external domain. Once the interface comes up, we'll navigate to DNS zones. And again, if you're not using SUSY Enterprise Linux, then just modify the DNS configuration on yours to reflect the proper mail exchangers. And in the MX records section, we'll simply get rid of linuxcbt work1 and include a new, or replace it with linuxcbt SUSYServe1 as the MX handler. And we should ensure that we do have an A record for this host. We do. It's in there, so we'll just save the changes. And now we can exit YaST. And a dig will reflect the update. Let's read dig from the SUSY Enterprise box, and this is proper. So now from shell number 2, if we attempt to send a message, we'll use mut as the user root. We'll send the message to root at linuxcbt.external testing virtual domains. You can call this basic virtual domains. It's very basic. That message has been sent, and on the left hand side we can tail var log mail to see whether or not any new messages have come in. Here's a connection from 172, and the message was sent to root, status equals sent. It's not actually stuck in the mail queue. So let's launch Mutt and search for the message. Now if you don't see the message here, this probably implies that the message was rerouted. Let's actually grep root from the aliases file to see whether or not the message was routed to a different user. Now there are many entries in here for root, so we'll just see if it actually routed it to a different user. And it doesn't look like it has. Let's actually tail var log mail again to examine where the items have been rerouted to. We'll see if it was actually bounced back to the original sender. Client unknown is the last message that came back to root at linuxcbt.external, status sent. And in fact, our system sees the host that handles the message as linuxcbt work1, so it bounced it back. So in fact, the message was sent here and it's just going in between the hosts. This is probably because of the transport table. Let's take a look to see if we have the transport table defined to handle linuxcbt.external, and that's the problem. So the message did make it to our SUSE Enterprise system, but it was sent back. So let's nano transport, and we'll simply get rid of this initial entry, the first entry. We'll execute postmap against the transport database, and we don't need to reload postfix for the changes to take effect. So now let's compose a new message again. We'll send it to root at linuxcbt.external. So a little cleanup was necessary. Test 2 of basic virtual domains. We'll save the changes, and now the message has been routed. Let's examine the log file again. And our system is actually still routing it back to linuxcbt work1. Let's dig linuxcbt.external mx from the perspective of the destination host, and it shows that it should be going to .30. So let's actually execute a postfix reload so that the settings are forced to take effect immediately. And let's send the third attempt to root at linuxcbt.external. We'll say test 3 of basic virtual domains. And we've sent the message yet again. Let's examine the log file because this tells us where the message was actually sent to. And finally, the message has been delivered to the mailbox. So we just needed to execute a reload because the postfix didn't read the updates immediately. Now let's check our mailbox, and there's finally the message. We have it, and it's been routed from root at linuxcbt work1 to us. So we're handling this additional domain. But the idea behind virtual domains is that, or at least basic virtual domains, is that all users can receive or will receive messages destined to the username at the domain that's hosted or defined by the MyDestination parameter. And to prove that point, as root, let's generate yet another message. We'll send it to linuxcbt SUSE1 at linuxcbt.external. And this message will also be sent to the box on the left. We'll purge the message. Let's just take a look at the home directory. We also have another user, Dean. So we'll CC the user Dean on this message as well. We'll say testing basic virtual domains. Let's CC the user Dean at linuxcbt.external. And by default, postfix is going to map the message to both mailboxes. Let's now examine the log file again. And here we have it. The message was actually sent to linuxcbt SUSE serve1. Delay of 0. And here comes the next message. linuxcbt SUSE serve1 linuxcbt.internal was sent to the vacation command. This is because of the aliases, of course. But nonetheless, if we check the mailbox as the user, we'll see the message. So let's Control-Shift-N. We're in as linuxcbt SUSE1. Let's launch Mutt. There's a new message. undeliverable mail, but here's the next message. Testing basic virtual domains, which was also copied to Dean at linuxcbt.external. Now this message that we see here, postfix vacation was unable to reroute the message. That's just the vacation program having a problem responding to who the source or sender claims to be in this case. That's not a problem. That's all based on the DNS being configured correctly and the destination host accepting messages. And a separate window, let's SSH in as Dean to the local system. And we'll launch MUT as the user Dean, and there's a new message. We have an old message here, but here's the testing basic virtual domains. So again, the idea behind basic virtual domains is as follows. Let's go back to the original system. We'll clear screen. Let's postconf grep my destination. The my destination parameter directive determines the list of local domains that are also considered hosted, since they're not canonical domains. Canonical domains refer to or map to domains that are tied to the system, which usually is one. But whatever my destination is defined to handle is considered to be routed locally. It's not defined under relay underscore domains. It's defined in my destination first, and then of course relay underscore domains will route it. But it's considered to be local, and we can append to this list, or we could alter my destination to look up a hash map with a list of infinite number of domains to be considered local. This is in a basic case. Now ideally you may not want all users on the system. When I say all users, I mean users who have Unix mailbox accounts or Linux mailbox accounts listed in the etc password file. You may not want the users linuxcbt SUSY1 and Dean to share the same domain. You may want them to share different domains, like in an ISP environment where you split the users on the system. So what we'll look at next is mapping the users that are local or defined locally in the etc password file who have an actual Linux account or Unix account. We'll look at splitting them and mapping them to totally different domains. Perhaps we'll map linuxcbt SUSY1 to linuxcbt.internal and map the user Dean to linuxcbt.external to illustrate how to split the users who do share a common user accounts database but totally different domains.